Live brunch. We are live. Welcome to another episode of
Live Brunch.
Live brunch.
Live
Brunch.
Hello, welcome to Live Brunch. Thank you for joining us. This is the part of our morning where we continue the conversation and we invite you to get involved in that conversation. Ask your questions to ask, and I'll be putting them in just a moment to Virgo, who's with us, and Christine Liddiard and Matt Carvel. Thank you for joining us today. We've had some questions that have come in. Thank you to Beth, thank you to Katie, thank you to Poppy. Other questions might be still coming in, so it's not too late. I'm looking at the chat right now, so send them in. But every week, as well as you asking us questions on the topic that we're looking at today as we start our reboot series, we always have questions for you. Questions for you to ask in your small groups, with your friends, and the conversations that you're having in the week. How can you take what we've heard today and work that out into your life? So there's three questions that we want you to be thinking about. The first one is just generally, what did you find interesting, surprising, or helpful about the story that we're looking at today from Genesis, which is about the Tower of Babel? Second question, in what ways do you recognize the tendency in your life to make a name for yourself? That's the key idea that we're thinking about today, making a name for yourself. So what does that look like for you? Is there a tendency there? Then thirdly, what is this passage and teaching reveal to you about Jesus, and what difference does that make in your life? Chris, I want to start with you with that second question, really. Making a name for yourself, that's a temptation for all of us. Yeah, what does that look like for you, in your experience, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think it probably looks different with each individual and their background. You know, Joel was talking about the background story, and I think my story is one of not feeling very affirmed when I was younger. So I try to do everything really well. Okay. So making a name for myself is, for me, the temptation is to do it perfectly so that people will praise me. Okay. And so obviously if I do something like this, or if I lead a small group, or if I do anything I do, this is one of the things that I'm thinking about now. Am I doing this for my glory? Am I doing this for God or for others? And I think if we're honest, all of us have mixed motives all the time. And I want to say that's okay. It's okay in the sense that that's normal, but we do need to keep a check on ourselves. And I have to do that. I have to really pray about, you know, Lord, what are my motives in this? Am I serving you in this? So that would be That's
really helpful, because it can be a really subtle thing as well. I mean, Joel, you talked about ambition, and some of us might think, well, I'm not particularly ambitious, but actually doesn't mean we're not, you are immune from this temptation to think, oh, how do they think about me, or that, you know, your reputation and that sort of thing. Do you want to add anything on that? Or?
I guess the irony is that for a lot of people, the problem is that they're not ambitious enough.
Right.
So it would be a tragedy to turn this story into essentially a kind of lesson against ambition.
Okay.
I think the problem, most of the guys that I know as Christians, if I'm honest, that's the thing I want to help them to see, is that they need to be more ambitious. I long for men to be way, way more ambitious than they are. But I don't think that's the same thing as this desire to create a name for oneself. Okay. And I think most people can, if they stop and think about it long enough, start to see the difference between those two things. I think being ambitious, the Bible talks about selfish ambition as a distinct category. So that's really helpful. It's like, okay, there's a difference. There's ambition and there's selfish ambition. And there's some subtleties in terms of how the one kind of, where they depart from each other. Yeah. But I think a lot of it ends up being quite common sense if we're honest enough.
That's great. We'll get into some more on that theme. I think there's a few questions that have come in are kind of around that theme. But Always on Live Brunch, as well as thinking about the topic that we've heard preaching about each week. We like to take something that's happened in the week and discuss that as well. And even over, we didn't have a Live Brunch last weekend, but something significant happened last weekend in terms of one of the political leaders. Sir Keir Starmer attended church on Good Friday and then later apologised for attending. Now, I guess I could ask you, was he right to apologise? But I'm sure you'd say, no, he shouldn't have had to apologise for attending church. But I think my question is then, does anything worry you, Joel and Chris, about the fact that he felt he needed to apologise? I mean, what does that incident kind of say about our society, our culture, the way things are going, that a church that has done so much good in the community, and that's why he was attending, and that's why the church was being praised, suddenly, very quickly, things have changed, and he has to apologise for even associating with that church. What does that speak to you and say about society? Anything worry you about that?
It's interesting to see a line being crossed. Lots of lines in a way. I mean, one of them is that it feels like a bit of a new world that we're in, even as a church. Because I would see that church, Jesus House, and especially Pastor Agu and his wife as people that we would feel pretty close affinity with. I mean, I would go as far as to see Pastor Agu as a friend. Yeah. I don't know if he's ever heard of. Well, he has heard of me. We've hung out even, but I don't know if he'd remember me as much as I remember him. This is me in my climbing.
Making a name for yourself with Pastor Agu.
No, he's a real hero. But so it's kind of weird to think. This is like guys who are our friends who are now in the headlines, big headlines. So that's new. And over an issue that, we would stand very much on the same page as Jesus House, unashamedly. We'd want to bring it the same way. I think it's, in reality, also worth bearing in mind that Keir Starmer's getting it in the neck for something that, frankly, every political leader would probably feel tempted to do the same, or at least I think Boris Johnson would do the same. Frankly, I think all these guys who are top of their tree have got to the top of their tree by being very, very careful and by not offending certain interests. That's how they've got there. He just is the one that managed to get caught out on it on Good Friday, which is his bad. But I think most of the top senior political leaders are on the same page. They're thinking, let's do everything we can to not offend progressive opinion. Yeah, I think it's also the common sense reality is that it's going to make it very hard for any Keir Starmer to go anywhere. Yes, because they're going to find there's quite a lot of churches, mosques, temples, where that line is basically the way they go, and they're going to have to sort of look carefully before they go anywhere and get ready to apologise if they walk into the wrong building.
It's a principle that is going to be difficult to be consistent on. That if you only ever associate with people that you agree with everything. I mean, I think even from the Christian perspective, we don't expect other people to agree with our opinion, but having a society where different opinions and different perspectives are allowed, but still communication and dialogue can happen, is one I think that is good. Anything you want to add on that?
I think the sad thing is that the purpose of the visit was to acknowledge the great work that church is doing. And I think what it's actually done is to cause abuse to come to that church, which they now have to deal with because it wasn't really well thought through. And I think that that's really sad. And I think that not to acknowledge the great work they're doing is really sad, really, and it's kind of taken away from that.
I hope that the reality is that loads of people quietly are coming to the opposite conclusion. Are actually thinking, hang on, that's not how I see it at all. And the shriller and more angry the guardians of a kind of a progressive opinion become, and it is shrill. It's like it's basically saying you now have to apologise for going somewhere. It's not just we disagree. It's you're not allowed to even go. You're not even allowed to disagree. That's not even the point anymore. So tolerance is actually over. That's the line that we've crossed. We used to talk about tolerance. It's not even tolerance anymore. So the thing is that's getting more and more kind of aggressive, harsher, and however much power institutional clout and leverage that kind of thinking gets, the majority of people, I think, will increasingly find it harder to listen to, because they'll just think you're just being unkind. You're just even if I'm not a Christian, I've read a lot of pieces this last week, people who clearly aren't Christians, but they're more rattled by that lobby than they are by what Keir Starmer originally did, which is really interesting. You wonder which way things will go.
Okay, no, that's really good. Let me move us on and into some of these questions that have come in, that sort of thing. Possibly some people are wondering, I think, in the social media age, so going back to this theme of ambition, many young people's their ambition or what they want to aspire to would be something like influencer, and so are we saying then it's just wrong to make a name for yourself? Is that a wrong ambition? Someone wants to be an influencer, someone wants to put themselves forward in that realm, in social media or any other realm. From what you're saying today, are you saying, no, actually, don't do that? We should seek a more humble profession, and that's a Christian way? Would you see that?
I think every generation and culture has distinct kinds of temptations that are kind of inherent to it, that are different than other temptations. So, for example, internet pornography means that choosing not to look lustfully at someone 150 years ago, choosing to look lustfully at someone was a very different commitment to make than it is now. It's like, okay, now the availability of images, it's just so the kind of degree of temptation, degree of prevalence of temptation is not standardized across times and cultures. Okay. And I think in the area of trying to make a name for yourself is another one that has gone off the charts in our generation. So again, go back to another generation, or go to other parts of the world now, and even the possibility of having people follow me. Yeah. The fact that it's literally as bold as that. It's like, how many followers have I got? How many
5,600 is how many you've got on Twitter. Incidentally. I looked it up
That's
earlier.
somebody who's doing some research. That's fascinating.
Well, yeah, sorry. I've hijacked that.
I think Matt's number of followers have gone up significantly since he's become
a celebrity.
This is a pertinent question for me. So this guy's become a major player when it comes to fantasy football league in the last few weeks. And you can follow him, and you'll find him online, and it's fascinating. But no, it's like, this is a new thing. Like that isn't normal. That's a brand, and so we mustn't be dense. We must. I think young people need to realise that isn't normal. That is not. Your grandparents did not live in that world. You live in a different world where you can just wake up one day and decide to try and be a celebrity. Generations ago, that was just not a thing. Yeah. It's like you either got given an axe to, a pickaxe to get coal out with, or a hoe to do. Those were your options in life. And marry someone hopefully who's not your cousin, and that's your life. There you are. That's your options. And we have just so many possible kind of ambitions. We just need to be real about the temptation that draws us into. And the answer is not to say, therefore, that's all evil. It just means you've got to walk really wisely and realise, okay, I've got to decide in my heart that I can lose that all overnight, and that will be to the glory of God. Okay, if God gives me thousands of followers, praise God. But he's allowed in an instant to just see, and I've got to see that as that's not the point of life. The point is how many followers he's got. And so if it serves him for me to have so many followers, fine. If that's the role I've got, it's a pretty dangerous one, because I'm going to be more tempted than most people to guard that. But fair enough, if that's what God's called me to. But man, my goal needs to be ultimately be how many followers he's got.
I think a good motto would be, I must decrease that he might increase.
Yes.
If you could have that written over your desk while you're being an influencer and hold true to that, then maybe that's okay. But I think the temptation is so great to think that I'm so wonderful. But actually quite a lot of what goes out is very shallow, isn't it? It's about externals. It's not really about the things that matter. And I think that if we're promoting ourselves in any way, it should be to glorify God and to promote what he says and what the Christian life is about. Obviously, you can have businesses and things like that. I'm just thinking on the spot about the kind of principles you'd need to do that, because I think it is just such a minefield, really.
Yeah, totally.
And let's go back to what you were referencing earlier there, Joel, about I suppose in one sense the need to be ambitious from a Christian perspective. There might be maybe a false humility in Christians that, well, I'm just not going to put myself forward. But even, I guess, referencing that the way society is going and that sort of thing that we were talking about a minute ago, do we not need Christians to become ambitious in terms of being politicians, being lawyers, being doctors, being media personalities, being artists and influencers and filmmakers, and in order to bring a Christian perspective, Christian worldview, Christian influence into our society? Is that not an important thing to do? And how would someone do that in a way that's honouring to God, but also is collecting followers and collecting influence as they go?
Yes, yeah. I think that even the person that this is one of those places where there's kind of paradoxes involved, because the person that achieves the most genuinely and creates the biggest name for themselves in the end is often the person who's genuinely died to that.
Yeah.
And that I think that's true outside the church. I think that the politicians who've really made a difference, changed history, sometimes they're actually not that big on their own ego. Some of them are. Okay. But some of them, you can tell, they've decided long ago they didn't really care about whether their name was famous. That otherwise they wouldn't have taken so much abuse or whatever. You know, they just But because they were just, that wasn't the main focus. They just kind of, okay, whatever, you want to tell me I'm great, I'm going after this. This is more important.
They actually want to get something done.
Exactly, and there's a brilliant. Well, I guess in the end, I was going to mention something, a book that's probably out of print, so it's not worth mentioning. But I think just the whole difference between being leader, being and doing. Yeah. One of the things my dad said to me when I was a teenager was, forgive me if this comes across wrong with it, boys want to be someone, men want to do something. And I apologise if it sounds sexist, I don't know, maybe that's irrelevant, but just, the desire to be something is kind of a boys' game. Men are like, I'm done with that, I want to do something. And in reality, the most influential, actual influencers, sometimes you don't even know who they are until the game's over. No one even notices them. It's fascinating watching, the guys even just on a football field. It's Van Dijk, the defender, who doesn't score goals. He's injured and Liverpool just implode. That's my take, my humble take on the season. Obviously, I don't have your wisdom, but it's like Liverpool are kind of just the great team. It's because someone who's not a glory hunter, we'd think, well, maybe in some ways he is, but it's like, you know what I mean? It's just a difference. You have huge influence and impact without being that kind of.
Yeah. So I guess one of the things we want to say to, whether it's young people or whoever, okay, if you want to be an influencer, but what are you going to influence?
Yeah.
How are you going to influence? Yeah. What do you want to say? What do you want, rather than just be an influencer? But it's the content of it. It's not wrong to want to be an influencer. Totally. It's influencing for good. What are you going to point people towards? Yes. What are you going to say? What's the statement that you want to make and that you feel that people need to hear and that sort of thing?
That's right. I would rather listen to the expression coming from someone who has so much to say but doesn't say it very often.
Right.
So, sorry, I spoke. I should shut up.
I can't remember what I was going to say. I was just thinking about seek first his kingdom and all these things will be added to you. Yeah. That, rather than seeking to be an influencer or seeking to have this name, that actually that might well happen through seeking first his kingdom. And again, it's another thing that's good to live by, isn't it? To put his kingdom first.
And then even, sorry, I'm making this question longer, but this is the lovely thing. God isn't opposed to giving us a name.
No.
That's it. It's like, so God's cool with it. He's not like he's saying, no, you should be nameless and faceless bureaucracy. It's like, I don't like people being famous.
Plenty of names in the Bible.
Totally. Like Abraham, the next chapter is like God says, I will make your name great.
Yeah.
It's like, man, that's fascinating. Isn't that interesting? God's cool with that. He loves actually celebrating people. So he's got no problem. It's just it's on the other side of dying. Yeah. You've got to die to it first, and then God raises it up on his terms and not on ours.
Yeah. Can I just say something about that?
You can.
Name? In this passage, they say they want to make their name great, and there's a play on words there because the Hebrew word for name is Shem. And Shem was the line of blessing.
Yes.
So what they're wanting, actually, is they want the blessing without the blesser. And in this conversation about influences, I think this is really important that, are we seeking the blessing and the prosperity, without the blesser?
Yeah.
Or are we coming to the blesser first? You know, we want to be like the Psalm 1 person, don't we? That God prospers them. It's God who prospers, and that's what we should be looking for, because so often we're trying to do it like these people. We're trying to build independently of God. We're trying to build something that's separate from him rather than starting and initiating with him.
Brilliant. There is so much really in this passage, and the good news is that next week we're also going to be preaching from this passage and pulling out more of the detail from that, particularly to do with the sort of community aspects of it and what it means to be unified and scattered and different cultures and that sort of thing, and how Jesus has brought the church together. And so we're going to be unpacking those ideas. But I hope you can join us for that. I hope you have a great week. And why not join us in the room next week, even for live brunch as well. We'll be here and look forward to seeing you then. Have a great week. Take care.